Well, welcome everybody. Sure. It's so absolutely cool to be here. And thank you, Johna. I know it's 12 o'clock midnight in the US at the moment. So really thank you very much for accepting this. In fact, Johna and I had this discussion at one of the conferences in Chile 2 years ago. We said we were going to actually have this as a live event. Unfortunately, we're having it as a virtual event, but it's cool. That's part of life. It happens, and it's really, really exciting actually for us to have this and engage with the rest of the team, with Renee Bienico, who used to be the president of PRISA, is now the strategic communications of UJ. So welcome, Renee. Basile, thank you very, very much for accepting this invitation, and it's really cool to hear your insights into that. And Bulewa, I mean, we've known each other for a very, very long time, and I mean, sure, communications at the NPA is hectic, and the kind of stuff that they ultimately get on a continuous basis, and if they're not measuring what the outcomes, media will just take it on and guide them. Instead of them, it'll be the tail wagging the dog instead of the dog wagging the tail. So it's really cool also, Bulewa, to really have you on board. Before I hand over to Johna, I just want to say, guys, we're offering, and thank you very much to AMEC and Johna for this, but we're offering 10, should I say, foundation courses of the Barcelona Principles and on how the best and what the best practices are. So those of you who ask really cool questions, you have this opportunity to win this to win this foundation course. It's only valid. You need to finish it by the end of January. It is really only for AMEC members, but Johna very kindly has offered it to the broader South African and African community. So thank you very much. But also from an Ornico perspective, once you've done the course, we'll work with you guys to try and see how do you fit it into your communication. So fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Johna. So without further ado, Johna, thank you. If you can just start your presentation, just talk about, I know we're just talking about really the foundation. If you could just talk about what's happening internationally, just to get all our communicators on board to see what is happening and benchmark South Africa against the rest of the world, but also just to show us what is happening around the world. So over to you.
You bet. Thanks so much, Oresti. It is such a pleasure to be here and to be sharing time with everyone. This is AMEC Measurement Month, so it is favorite month of the year. And this is such an important element to be talking about. And, you know, Oresti talked about the foundation course of media measurement and evaluation. And yes, that is only one part of the equation, but it is part of the equation that people fall back to, that they have a challenge. And it's one of those reasons why AVEs is still prominent. I would be remiss if I did not say that Francois Van Dyke, who is the chair of the MIA chapter of AMEC, and with Ornico, was absolutely instrumental and critical in getting this foundation course up and going. He works on our education committee, and that dedication and commitment is so appreciated, and it leaves me in awe of the leadership that we have within our association. And it is representative of understanding what all of those communities, how they're thinking and what they're doing. And that's what makes the Barcelona Principles, the Integrated Evaluation Framework, and the Measurement Maturity Mapper possible, because we have great people contributing to that and understanding where everyone stands on that curve. So thank you so much to Francois and to Ornico for that member support. It really is critical in our success. And as we look at the Barcelona Principles, I think it's really important to understand, you know, kind of where we are. I do like to get started and to tell everyone that we do have a potential bonus presenter here with me tonight. And he you know, is actually very passionate about the subject of measurement and evaluation. It's kind of random, his feedback, but when it is, it's very meaningful and very measured. And Tonight, it might be a little bit more because this is a prime coyote time for them in the front yard, which always gets them a little excited out of the blue. So this is Jammy. If he does have anything to say, please sit up, take note, even more so because this is going to be really compelling stuff. So nothing to be missed there. A little bit of information about me. I have been in communications for 30 plus years. I come from it at a very different time where the tech that was most exciting for me was the fax machine. It's like, this is it. This is the tech that is going to change how we do our jobs. I actually embarrassingly gathered everyone around and I was like, this is it. This is where we take that next step forward. Fairly crazy to think about now, but that's where we come from. And, you know, communication is difficult. That's what this picture represents. Even when we speak the same language, we're staring face to face, communication can be hard. And so that's what makes elements of measurement and evaluation so critical. So you can understand what's working, what's not working, those things that aren't working, how you can shift those levers, those things that are working, how you can take all of those other assets that you have at your disposal and amplify those pieces, because it really is critical. But before you can do that, even, you have to understand where you are in the process, where you are starting, and how you're going to get to where you're going. You know, so many times this is one of my favorite elements because people talk about, oh, but you know, this is the time of nomads, Johna. You're just very old fashioned. And I'm sorry, but even, you know, the nomad community, they know, are they going to be driving? Are they going to be flying? Are they going to be in a boat? You have to have some data about where you are, even if you're just going to walk the earth. So the Measurement Maturity Mapper, which is a free resource from AMEC, gives you the ability within the 6 to 8 minute diagnostic to understand where you are on your journey, whether you're at the basic level. It's going to tell you then how you can advance to the intermediate level and how you can get to the professional level. And what that's going to do is also going to help you map against people in your region or within these other sectors. And that can be incredibly powerful as you're talking to your team, as you're talking to your executives on why you want to go and why you want to take the next step in this journey. It can make them a little bit more competitive too. So I highly recommend, whether this is for your organization, whether you're at a PR agency and you want to do this with your clients, whether you're an educator and you want to start helping your students understand the language of communication and how it needs to be implemented, this is a great free resource to find out where everybody is in their understanding and on that measurement journey. Because before you can even get to the why, which is, you know, where you need to go next, you have to understand where you're starting. And to get to the why, you have to answer two questions, right? What is the business impact you're trying to achieve? And how can communications realistically, and that's sometimes the trick, realistically contribute towards that? But what's the human problem you're trying to solve? And this is really the tricky part because, you know, we are all so mesmerized by AI, by technology. It's, you know, attached to us at every stage. But behind all of that, behind the coders, behind the phones, behind all of those programs, there are the humans. There are those people who you're trying to influence and make that decision. And I would just beg you not to lose sight of the who as well as the why, what you're trying to accomplish, because that's what's going to make all of your results, all of your campaigns and your programs more meaningful when you can have that human connection and understand for that stakeholder why they're doing it. If their behavior changes, when you have a relationship with them, you can reach out to them, have those questions, have those conversations, and understand the why behind those behavior changes. And that's a big part of where we are right now. So many people had a lot of benchmarking data that they were using in this year called 2019 that they thought was going to take them, you know, through. That data is absolutely archaic at this point. You know, you might as well go dig up some stones and see what the carvings are on them because behaviors have changed. And if you are going to apply the Barcelona Principles that we're going to go through in a few minutes, you need to understand and have that customer journey map for your stakeholders to understand where they are, those demographics, the psychographics that are affecting them, because there's no broad brush solution to this. You know, everybody who's ever heard of the New York Times example is not part of your customer journey mapping. So really, the better you have a profile there, the more effective you can be. And that's what's going to allow you to target your communications, to target those elements, and then, you guessed it, to be able to measure and evaluate them. Because it really does go hand in glove. And that's what brought us to the Barcelona Principles. The Barcelona Principles were created back in 2010. They were updated in 2015, and they were the latest update was from 2020. And that's where we are. Setting measurable goals is a fundamental prerequisite to communications, planning, and measurement. And I love this picture because communications without planning really is this. It looks good. You know, yep, that looks about right, but you can't do anything with it. And so to understand where you are, you have to start with your goals, and you have to understand the change that you want to see, you know, and that needs to be founded in research. And that doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be expansive. It doesn't have to be, you know, a big fancy research firm, but it does need to be founded in research, because when you are incorporating data into everything you're doing, it's going to build trust, credibility, and reputation of your expertise, of your department, and of your organization. And the more you do that, that's where you're going to get to those models where people are talking about predictive modeling and being able to then say, okay, when we were in a situation like this, this is what people did. Now we can plan better for those crises, for those situations as they come up. And your goals need to be defined prior to those campaigns. Why is this important? Again, if you don't know where you're going, it makes it pretty hard to get there. Some of the things that we talk about, you know, goals are not KPIs, but KPIs can be a component of goals. And when you make those goals quantitative and qualitative, it is much easier to understand and to be able to track against some of those trends. And that's where you're going to be able to answer some of those questions that are going to commonly come up with your executives or your clients, which is the how, the what, the how much, and the why you're doing this. And so what you're trying to do is this is where you're going to apply that customer journey map so that when they're asking those questions, you can have more specific answers. The why? Well, because people in this demographic are doing this when they hear this. And that's going to be really critical. And I can't express this enough, but I'm sure all of you are familiar with the SMART business objectives. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And I add an E and an R onto that. And the E is that it's ethical. How you're producing content, how you're aggregating content, how you're working with partners and with competitors, how you're working with data. You don't have any black hat practices in play, but you are doing all of that in an ethical manner. And then the R, it could be two things. I'll let you choose. It can either be for results or it can be for revolutionizing. And when you are revolutionizing how your organization is traversing through all of these changes, through the power of communication, that's what's going to change those conversations from, can we please have budget, to how much more budget are we going to be talking about? Because when you are demonstrating the effectiveness of communication, it changes all of those conversations. And when it's holistic and aligned across all of the other businesses, across paid, earned, shared, and owned, once you are looking at that in an integrated way, now all of a sudden, the budget, all of the tools and all of the resources coming to bear in a single way makes it so meaningful. So when you partner with a group like Ornico to talk about some of those deeper analytics, you're able to bring more data to them. And when you get more data, you're able to get more insights. And that's what's going to give you a more predictable journey and make you much more effective when you're talking to your senior team. And I would say, this is the integrated evaluation framework. And embarrassingly, I will confess that it was just last year that we introduced the planning primer. So before we introduced the planning primer, we had the first block of the integrated evaluation framework that was objectives. And we couldn't figure out why we weren't getting better adoption. And it was because there were still professionals who weren't aligning their objectives, who weren't using SMART objectives. And so tile number 1 was a deal breaker. Now you have a lot of great resources for tile number 1, so no excuses. And it's really critical when you're looking at this to be able to say, why you're doing what you're doing, and then align that. And then this is, again, a free online tool for you. It takes you through all of those steps. I know that the team at Ornico can also help you walk through those steps, but it then produces for you a one-page PDF, which is your roadmap of why you're doing what you're doing, how you've aligned those KPIs, how you've aligned those objectives, where you expect them to take place across paid, earned, shared, and owned, and then measure and evaluate your abilities across that. And this is a process file. This isn't something that if you take this to your executive team, they're going to think, what's going on with communicators? This is a business aligned with business process. They will be relieved. They will embrace that it isn't some new, crazy vanity metric or something that they've never heard of. Something like this taken to your executive team when they see the process that you're following can instill confidence, can instill their support. And so you should be very confident and proud to take this once you have it completed and say, this is our roadmap. This is the journey that we're going on. This is where we expect to get. And this is the why behind that. And I think you'll find that you'll have much more support, because I can say that, we often talk about these vanity metrics, and no CEO that I've ever met is, there wringing his hands. Oh, if only we could get more vanity metrics. And so the more you are inclusive of all of the things that you're trying to accomplish, it's just going to position you to be a better advocate and a better professional within your organization to be able to have that trust and credibility that you need. Barcelona Principle number 2, meaningful measurement and evaluation must consider both outputs and outcomes across the audience journey. And this is really so critical, because when you look at an integrated forum, if you don't have that baseline language agreement, it makes everything else almost impossible to accomplish. And so when you're looking at the outtakes, what do you want people to think differently as a result of what you're planning to do? What do you want your audiences to take out of what your communications are providing? And then you go to those outcomes. What do you want people to feel, as a result of these efforts? What is the effect that your communication will have on your target audience? And then when you get to the impact, and this is the critical piece, because when you're looking at an integrated program, this is absolutely critical in success, and that is impact. What do you want people to do differently? And what are you taking in full or in part credit for your communication? Because we know that marketing works, advertising works, PR works, internal communications work. But we also know that when they are all aligned and working together, they work exponentially better. And it is really important to understand that. So now when you're talking about sharing data, you're talking about looking this across the PESO model. Once they know that you're only taking, certain parts of that and that you are going to be collaborative, it changes that conversation. And when you look at share of search, and now if they're starting to see the language of your target audience is changing, and it isn't the acronym that the PR professional has, taken great pride in creating, but the customer is talking about something differently, when you have a heads up to that, that's going to make your ability to communicate with them in a meaningful way that much easier. And so making sure that you understand across those channels and that you do lower those barriers within your internal teams is really a critical piece, because you have to look at, when you're looking at how people search, that is giving you some of that behavior data that's going to be really important. And when we talk about all this being founded in research, again, doesn't have to be expensive. There are tools out there that are pretty cheap and easy. One of our members, Ask the Public, has a free tool that you can use. There's Google Scholar, also a free resource for accessing papers, across the social sciences, so you can attribute it to some of those behavioral references. But when you're summarizing those problems and you have that agreement between all of your groups, it's going to make a huge difference. And now when you bring out the framework, now you're going to really identify in a concrete way what the sources are that you need, what it's going to require, what the resources are, and then how you're going to be able to map that for success. One of probably the most valuable resources that we do provide, I believe, in my humble opinion, is the taxonomy in the integrated evaluation framework. And this is not designed to be some exhaustive example, but this is showing you examples within the inputs, the outputs, the activities, the outcomes, and the impact. And this is so important because now once people start seeing their elements and their pieces coming together, it gives them a better orientation of why they need to have a broader view of everything, even though they might be specializing in their own area. And when you look at that categorization, again, not exhaustive. Someone's going to say, oh, but this doesn't have the, left-handed, one blue-eyed woman's event in here. No, there's something that's going to be close. So look at this as a guide. Look at this as a tool that you can use moving forward, and then be able to apply that, because this is where you're going to get those major stages of communications identified for you. And once you can agree within your organization or with your clients where you are in that ecosystem, it makes it so much more meaningful for how you can contribute to the overall success. That leads us to Barcelona Principle number 3. The contribution of communications, societal, and organizational impact should be considered. There is no one right way to measure societal or organizational impact of communication, but considering the following will definitely make it easier. Determine how relevant it is to your stakeholder. When you're working with a global brand, this is where that micro-targeting and the localized contacts are really critical, because the language can be different, the understanding of things can be different. This should include thinking beyond just sales services, but really go into that impact on employees when they hear some of these messages. How do they think, feel, and react to that? Does it affect your lead generation depending upon what else is going on? Do they see where you're based, that maybe there's something going on where your headquarters are based, and they need to understand that there is a regional and a hyper local implication to this that can help change those attitudes and behaviors as well? Because when you're looking at exploring some of these communication efforts, you need to be looking with multiple lenses of how this is affecting your market, and how they're able to search is going to be one piece of that. But again, that human connection. How are your employees talking about this on Facebook? How are their family members and their friends responding to them when they understand that there is a parallel between their organization and some big societal impact? And the better you understand that, and the better you connect to that, it's going to help you understand the human condition and how you're trying to affect people. And it really does make a difference to be able to whiteboard and have a contrarian on your team. Have someone there that's going to be challenging those norms. If everyone is in violent agreement, you might have a problem. And so I always encourage everyone to have a contrarian. And I used to call it the 4-year-old niece model, where there's always those extra questions. Make sure you understand that, so that you are definitely showing that impact and the value of everything that you're doing, and that you have considered that when you're whiteboarding those elements. Barcelona Principle number 4, communication measurement and evaluation should include both quantitative and qualitative analysis. And I cannot express this enough. This is one of those elements that leads us into the weak vanity metrics and that of the AVE. And when you are looking at measuring and evaluating communication, this requires tracking and applying both quantitative and qualitative feedback across all of your channels. And this is where when we offer the foundation course of media monitoring and evaluation, it is a silo, because there is a lot to be covered there, but that certainly is not all of PR. And it's important to understand, because when you're looking at all of those, sorry about that, I don't quite know what happened. When you're looking at all of those elements, it's important to understand what those implications are and how those can affect your target audience as well. Quantitative metrics are fantastic for giving that fast feedback. It's going to give you that pulse. It's going to give you that indication of what's going on. But you need to look at then the qualitative overlay of what are those other conditions, what's happening there. I always challenge people that unless you have taken your partner in and given them, shared the brief with them, shared all of the objectives with them, and they are pushing a report to you, if you are then just pushing that report along without looking at it specific to stakeholders, specific for what they're trying to see for the accomplishments of communication, you're probably going down a pretty slippery slope, and you should, tread with caution. And here are a couple of examples why. I love this example. He visited his daughter's kitchen, and then he left an honest review. Understanding the perspective and the context of that feedback from a quantitative and a qualitative view is absolutely critical. I know that my favorite example are these Amazon 5-star reviews. Some CEOs, we want 5-star reviews. We only want 5-star reviews. At what cost? At the cost to your reputation, at the cost to your credibility, because now people think that you are just paying people for those contributions. And it's really important to understand, when you look at this review as an example, I needed to get a new lock for my gate to keep people out of the pool. So, 5 stars, this is great. Until you see, this is a great training tool for someone to pick a lock. Yeah, not what we're looking for. So understanding the context and reading and not just looking at those quantitative metrics, but always understanding what the qualitative are behind them is absolutely critical to be able to determine your success. And again, give the data that you're sharing with your executive teams credibility, because you do not want that question and have them say, well, what's behind these 5-star reviews? I went and looked at them, and here's what this is. This is ironic. Once you lose that credibility, it's almost impossible to build that back. And one of the fastest ways to erode that is Barcelona Principle number 5. AVEs are not the value of communication. This is our least changed Barcelona Principle, and actually went back to some of its original roots, because it is so critical to understand the dynamics of digital media, the dynamics of advertising versus earned media. They're totally different. You don't control all of one. You can't advertise everywhere. And so you must take into account the data that you're putting forward. It can be in an index. I mean, there are people who have had this as a benchmark. It can be in an index of multiple things that maybe is going to be an early indicator of something is happening. But delivering this, and the age-old excuses, my executives demand something with a $sign. If they are really saying that to you, it's because you haven't demonstrated what you are bringing as far as value to the organization, how you are aligned with the organizational goals, and they don't understand the long tail value of communication. That when you are looking to impact reputation and trust, that isn't a $sign, that isn't some quick metric that you can take off of the shelf that applies to everything else. And so that's why we've created the 22 reasons to say no to AVEs. And this is going to give you a couple of reasons that you can then give some pushback when they say, we need this $sign. Well, it's not really ROI. You know, this is showing a comparative in that single moment, and it doesn't have a solid methodology. And so even if your partner demonstrates that methodology to you and you're transparent about that, there's still going to be questions about it down the road, because those numbers will change, they will shift, they will erode. It's just the nature of the business right now. And so it's best that you avoid that however you can. And in doing so, it's going to lead you to principle number 6, and that is holistic measurement and evaluation includes all relevant online and offline channels. And this is where I think the last 2 years are going to have the greatest impact on expectation of people, because when so much has been digital, so much has been in this environment where we can, track clicks, track eyeballs, track all of these things, it's going to be difficult for some of these event producers to then show how they're getting that direct tie back to all of those elements. But it absolutely can be done. And that's where that behavior element is going to take into effect. And so when you are looking at those other behaviors that your stakeholders are making, how they're changing, how long they're spending on your site, is that sales cycle reduced? Where those people that are more qualified now, that met you at an event, that have had a good previous experience, those are those pieces where you need to go all the way to that point of sale data and track that throughout the customer journey to be able to apply that and demonstrate that effectiveness. And that's what leads us to principle number 7. Measurement and evaluation are rooted in integrity, transparency, learning, and insights. And I love this example. This is Anthony Ryan Schmidt, and he is a forced perspective photographer. He's actually a 13-year-old autistic kid who has this as his therapy. And it is beautiful, the scenarios that he creates. But it also reminds us that the things that we see are not always as they are. And so when you are working with data, you want to make sure that you are absolutely sure about that. Misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, fake news, there are so many different names that it goes by nowadays. Make sure that your communications are never entwined in that web, because it's so important that you are very transparent, honest, and ethical about how you're dealing with things. The AMEC is based in the UK, and so we have a whole love-hate relationship with GDPR and all that entails. I'm in Arizona. California next door has something even more restrictive than GDPR. And so if you're looking at data, how you access data, that has to be some of that as well. Those data sources, how you're getting those. But also the bigger thing is the bias that's baked into those things. And this is something that's sometimes lost on people, like, oh, well, we use artificial intelligence. Okay, but that artificial intelligence was coded by a human being. Where was that human being? What is their bias? Because their biases naturally will go into their code, depending upon where they are regionally, depending upon their age, depending upon some of their perspectives. And you need to understand that, because that can affect then your content bias, your sample bias, the research itself. The age-old joke is, ask me what you want the audience to say, and I'll tell you how to ask the questions. that's a challenge. And that's why even looking at, in the US, everything's about a poll in politics. Well, the polling data can have an arc, it can have an interesting angle to it. But if you don't understand the questions that were asked, it makes it very difficult to make any decisions based on that. And it is all a balancing act. But I would offer for you, always push back that communications and PR is about that long tail cycle of reputation and enhancing the reputation. Don't be drug into any of those ambiguous or, quick vanity metrics, because it can definitely lead you astray. And when you're looking at the trust and the perception of and the advocacy of your brand, those are elements that you can tie to when you're working with your partners across the PESO model, looking at how you're able to affect that. Because if you don't, you're making a mistake. And I love this quote: we need to stop interrupting what people are interested in and be what people are interested in. And when you're doing that, you're aligned with that human condition. It's going to make you a lot smarter. It's going to make you a more relatable brand. And people will tell you the areas that you need to improve, and they'll stick with you more likely as you make those improvements. So many times everyone is in this big haste to produce a report. And what you get from that is the so what, who cares? So make sure that when you're looking at measurement and evaluation, you have this aligned with your organization goals. You know where your team and organization are on their measurement and evaluation journey. So you're producing relevant information to each of those stakeholders. And the why matters because you know what they are trying to get from that and how they're going to use it. Maybe it's being used for research and development. Maybe it's being used because there is a government mandate of how you have to report certain things. If you aren't clear in your understanding, it makes it almost impossible for them to advocate for you moving forward. And I know there are so many things that you have to do. It can feel overwhelming to get started, but I would say start by going to amecorg.com and committing to aligning with the Barcelona Principles. It's going to be something that is going to help you and your team root in these principles and then branch out for how these are going to really work with your organization. Because there's two models that you can use. And I like to call it playing with fire. But when you get started, you want to use the play model. And that is identify the problem. Then look at the audience, know how you're working with them. Ask how I'm going to earn the attention of that audience. And then the why is the yes. You know what it looks like when you're successful. And then if you're still having a challenge with your team, light it on fire. And that is, we talk about that decisions are made 80% on emotional and 20% on rational. I can assure you when it's about your budget, when it's about that C-suite, they are the reverse and they want 80% on the rational. So lead to them with some of those fire questions. What are the factual thinking questions about what you can realistically do and how you can change those stakeholders? Insightful thinking, bring those third-party sources in to talk about how you're making some of those comparisons. Even sometimes a simple share of voice with tone and sentiment of some of your competitors can demonstrate where you are and why you need to make a change. The rational questions of, when we're looking at this for our employees, what are those signals? What are the messages that it's sending? And then those evaluative questions. How are we going to be able to relate to this? How are we going to be able to demonstrate the impact and the value of this? And with that, I know we have a great panel discussion coming up, and I would just leave you with all of these resources. And of course, Ornico will share the slides and share all of the links to the resources for you.
Great, Johna. Sure. I think I've seen this present in different forms a number of times in going through those different principles. And yet every single time I look at it, I learn something out of it. So I'm sure we've all learned, and thanks a lot for that. Johna, just before I go into the panel, I liked what you said, that goals are not KPIs. I thought that is, but a lot of the times, and I want to align it back to the AVEs, okay? Because a lot of the times, communication people are actually have their AVEs as a KPI to management, okay? Sometimes the agencies have a KPI of AVEs to their brands. And that's, as we've said within this conversation, is problematic. How do we convince both agencies and brands from that perspective to move away from the AVE model and not utilize it as a KPI? But it's not only them. How do we convince the C-suite or the financial director or whoever's the senior people in that space that this is not the way it should go?
So There's a reason. I will very inarticulately, I'm sure, summarize the 22 reasons to say no to AVEs, so if you'll indulge me. But I would say, my experience, Rusty, is I have never met a CEO who's like, all of my problems are cleared if you give me an AVE. Like, they don't even know what that is usually. All it is that it's been plugged in because, somewhere along the line in the 80s, somebody put a $sign in front of it. And so it is this kind of reflex to, marketing has a, attribution model, advertising, so we need to have that too. Those are those quick garnered details that communication, PR, is normally a longer tail. It isn't something that's reflexive. And so for people who have AVEs as a KPI, again, it can be an early indicator for your communications team, but it's not demonstrating the value of anything. And so depending upon who you're delivering it to, you have to push back and ask the why behind that. And if it is simply because, we need something with a $sign, it's like, okay, well then, let's look at when we amplify these messages and when we don't amplify messages, what is the percentage that we are seeing of faster conversion of something? Because I think we fall into this trap of, trying to be so expedient in giving people exactly what they want when, my name is Mark with a C, that wasn't exactly what he wanted. It's something very different. And I think that's the root of so many of these problems in our race to be expedient. We miss the point. The point isn't that they want something with a $sign. The point is they need to understand in business terms the value that they are receiving from communications and what is the impact of good communication and bad communication. And when you have a scorecard, when you have a model that's talking about reputation, when you have that's clearly stated and it's talking about, your influence in the market, even the sentiment around industry information, and you can look and see how your communication is impacting that or how it's maturing that for your audience, that's what matters, because then they can show that and say, okay, research and development, our market share is growing, but our, sales aren't growing at the same way. Why is that? Right? Give them a reason, something to push back on. But, Mark with a C is a pretty important thing for us to all leave in the back of our minds next time someone's like, I need that AVE. And an AVE can be one of those, activity output metrics that you track for your team, because it can, but that isn't something that you should be delivering to the C-suite. It's ludicrous.
Cool. But Basile, I'm going to look at it from a client perspective as well. And I'll stay in terms of how do you as an organization look at objectives, and what are the pros and cons within that marketing department, just to let the audience know some of the issues that you may go through, how do you resolve them, etc.
Yeah, thank you. This is quite insightful. I have to start off by saying I feel a bit attacked on the AVE situation.
I'm sorry.
Because it is the reality, this is what we've sold to the C-suite. And very quickly, I'm in financial services. So you can imagine how much more, the issue is in that space. So just to answer you, Oresti, so yeah, absolutely. We do set our objectives. The beauty of, I think, where we are as an industry is that finally marketing and communication, we are now a real family. I think gone are the days of us and them. So IMC is now a real thing. So in our space, we set goals and objectives as a collective now. It is expected. It's been a journey. It's finally, happening. So that's exciting. The challenges or the issues that we are always navigating is it's simple things such as who will lead this campaign, right? And so on, and how are we going to measure? So this comes at such an opportune time, I think, for us, particularly in my space. So we set objectives collectively. We even now include our research and insights team, who have been very deliberate in understanding our different spaces, because they now journey along with us. So it's made our lives a lot more easier. but it's really just shining the microscope on the value of PR and communication. And I really, really like that, because you're absolutely right. We have to move beyond AVE, PR value, and so on. The biggest thing in my world is how we are even now incorporating, the new world of communication, which is influencer marketing. Incidentally, within my space, it sits in our team, which is quite interesting. There's all the vanity measurements that the industry looks at, and we're still learning. We're trying to dig deeper around how do we do this better? How do we move away from the vanity measurement? And to your point, who exactly are we targeting, and so what, and so on and so forth. So to answer in a very short form, we are learning, we are evolving as we journey along. And I think it's forums such as this that actually just make us really, really take a step back and say, how do we collective with our agencies actually, move the needle forward and convince the C-suite that, AVEs, PR values, important, but it's really time to move on. So yeah.
Babelia, thank you very much. I mean, I think I remember Johna and Richard Bagnall and Simon were on when Clubhouse was a big thing at the time. They had a weekly talk about measurement action. It was really, really interesting because you saw the different views from both brands, agencies, internationally, and these talks they were actually talking about, and I came on the one day and I said some of the issues that we have in South Africa about those AVEs, and I remember Richard Bagnall actually saying, guys, it's just one step at a time. And it actually once people move to step 2 or 3, it becomes so easy they didn't know why they didn't do it before. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Bulewa, I know you gave me a call, I think it was about 2 months ago, in connection with aligning certain impact and outcomes with social media. So how, and NPA is actually not it's an organization, yes, but it's a kind of non-profit, it's governmental, it's not like a brand. So you look at your brand, it is a brand, of course it's a brand, like all of us as individuals are brand, the NPA is a brand. And your brand revolves around reputation on a consistent basis. Reputation is one of the only things that you have from an outsider's perspective. How are you managing that? Because obviously you can't tell that from AVEs, obviously. So you need to be able to align that in terms of the media and what happens in terms of your reputation around the NPA. So do you want to just give us some insights on what are the discussions with your team? How do you look at it? I know we've been working with you guys a long time, so we know it, but it's just really just to talk to the people and some of the guys out there.
Yes, thank you very much, Oresti. Thanks for that introduction. And I was almost horrified when you say NPA is not a brand. So thank you for correcting us on that. It's a big brand. Of course, one of the biggest challenges we've been having over years, and you know this very well, Ornico, Oresti, is how do we actually put because we've got the whole South African public, in fact, not just South Africa, obviously also internationally, that is a whole public that we need to engage with, and the kind of subject that we deal with affects every single life in society. And therefore, how do we actually really place ourselves in a at the center of how people understand what we're doing and what the NPA is about. For people who don't know, the NPA is the National Prosecuting Authority. It's the only agency that prosecutes crime in South Africa. So that's how it affects everybody. But in terms of how we are able to show some kind of value in our communication, we have to appeal to the public, but I also have to go and report back to the executive leadership in terms of what we are doing. And we have been struggling a lot with this over the years. Of course, you, Ornico, have been helping us a lot with the measurement of media. And you have also added some AVEs, but I mean, with caution, obviously, not knowing that it's not the be all and end all. So I have that AVE story there, but I don't really put too much attention to it. But in that, then that's where I struggle to actually really find perfect way of measuring how we are achieving our objectives. And therefore, for this year, for instance, in this financial year that we are in, one of the thoughts was maybe we just really need to zero in onto just one campaign, because we're now also trying to move a lot into digital communications, into the social media space. And it's easier to get into that also because then at least that comes with some easy analytics that, all the different platforms come with. And so we've kind of tried to develop ways of measuring through that. So we don't measure everything in one way, but we have just zeroed in on a campaign that focuses on how the NPA provides access to justice, because that's one of the organizational objectives that the overall NPA objective, among others, is to make sure that there's better access to justice for people in South Africa. Therefore, our role in communications is to make sure that people understand how it is to, how they access justice. And so one of the key areas that we thought could actually maybe, we start with in terms of measuring was our Tutuzela care centers. Tutuzela care centers are one-stop shops, I'll call them, where, victims of gender-based violence are encouraged to go and report, because then that's where you get all the support that you need, from reporting the case itself and getting it investigated, hopefully up to prosecution, but also the psychosocial support that you get. So there's a whole lot of access and a focus on victims there that we really need to promote a lot more, that people understand. So that's how we are really trying to get our measurement into how much of how much people do know how to access justice in this manner, through the Tutuzela Care Center. So it's sort of a microcosm of what we could actually be doing. That's how we are focusing ourselves for this financial year, and then it will grow. Obviously, the other usual things around reputation drivers and managing those, we get those very nicely packaged in the reports that the media monitoring companies give to us, like you've always done, and we continue to get. So that's a combination of things, but we're just really branching into a new way of communicating, and therefore finding ways of measuring the impact through particularly social media.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that one up, Bulewa, because we had spoken about it. And also just to show the industry sometimes how simple it actually can be. What was your objective? And that was getting some of those out. So what is the message that we need to, are those centers actually getting more traction, or they're not getting more traction? And I think it's actually quite a simple metric at the end of the day, and very, very easy to, pass it back up to the powers that be, to say, listen, this is the information that we're giving. This is what the media was talking about. And look how much more activity we're getting through those centers. Renee, yeah. Hopefully I can hear you, but I've got a fantastic question from Mpo Mahosi, and he says, I wonder if the Barcelona Principles can be used as a model for reference for a scholarly study, and specifically that you in that space. I think it's a really, really cool question. Absolutely. So if I can't hear you, maybe somebody else can engage back with you. Cool.
What a pity if you can't hear me, Oresti, because I have lots of good things to say about Ornico. But it's a brilliant question, because it is exactly something, sorry, Oresti, it is really something that I'm very interested and passionate about, is how do we change our own behavior? And following some of the chats, is really interesting to see how people are actually starting to rethink what it is that we are supposed to be doing as communicators. And how do we measure our own success stories? And I think scholarly research is really where we start. And just this week, we had our PRISA annual research colloquium, where exactly we showcase some of these research. So I would really like to invite whoever wants to study this again, because it has been done, the Barcelona Principles as well as AMEC's model has been studied locally through Dr. Landsberg, Tertia Landsberg. She did a study in 2019 that she published it at our research colloquium. So what we also discussed and said on Wednesday at the research colloquium is that we need a hub, and we need to plug in the success stories, because that will answer some of the feedback that we need. And Johna, I'm sure you would love to have more South African and Southern African case studies that we can actually plug into the success stories that we have, that there's such a good story to tell about our communication work that we are doing. And it shouldn't be reduced to just numbers and dollar signs and rand signs, but it's actually, how do we change the perceptions? How do we get people? And I loved what you said about meeting people where they are. We so often want to just plonk and dump almost what our objectives are without flipping the coin. And in preparation for this, there's such wonderful work that I've been reading, case studies, and Jim McNamara very well, a recent article of him and Prof. Anne Gregory that is exactly showcasing the flip side of how important it is to look at not just the organizational objectives, but to see it broader, to have a different lens, like your young photographer, which I loved. How do we present the reality is what is important. So I do hope, Oresti, you could get some of that, or anybody else that would like to add to my comment.
I'll aid Oresti a little bit in saying I would agree with you with all of the wonderful things you said about Ornico. And also, thank you for that. But yes, absolutely. Those case studies that you're talking about, that's what enriches the experience of everyone, because it's easy to talk about it. And please forgive me. I would never attack you or make you feel offended intentionally for anything in the world. It is the perspective of like the broad use of AVs and seeing that being a path to failure, unfortunately, in our expediency to, deliver exactly what someone asked for, we're setting ourselves up for that failure. And that's the challenge. Is it's not a turnkey solution oftentimes, but when you can see someone else's journey, someone else in your space, in your region, that how did they push back? How were they able to break through, and see that? That's what you can find inspiring. And that's what can create that light bulb effect for your C-suite, for the rest of your team members, so that as they're going through and looking then for those actionable things. And, sometimes those are going to be, like I say, that can be in an index. It might be in an index of your activities to demonstrate that success. But I would just caution you in delivering that to anyone outside of your comms team with the word value next to it, because that's, again, your reputation. And when people push back against that, I say, what is the single metric of success of a relationship? No one can name one thing. We've now that we have access to data and we're talking about it in a ones and zeros way, we believe that there is, a singular path. And that's simply not the case. It never has been. And just because we have data, it can help steer and guide us to the path that we want to take, but it's not going to be a single metric. Every good relationship has multiple touch points and value that we're going to see along the way. And that's what enriches it overall. And so it has to be seen in its entirety.
Oresti, if I can just jump in there, I agree 100%, Johna. It was just hilarious for me because, in our instances, as I said, it is still one of the most important ones, just based on the fact that, it's still financial services. And I have to say this, it's very cheeky of me to say it. However, you do know that we still do have to justify our existence in relation to our marketing peers, because they flaunt the budgets and, we then need to justify our budgets as well. Having said that, I think you know, the messaging matrix and all of that, 100%. Somebody did put that in the comment. But I think in Bulelwa space and maybe also just a lot in my space, the move towards sentiment, you know, is just getting more and more important. She drives a very complex, you know, topic. I drive a very complex topic as well. It's insurance and investments, you know, it's not sexy, but it is financial wellness if you look at it that way, you know. So more and more we are driving, we are digging deeper into how communication can play a role in changing behavior. So I love a lot of the sound bites that you've given us, because I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see how we dig deeper into this and match our objectives and add elements of the R, which is responsiveness, which I really like going forward. You know, so sentiment for me has also become a lot more important. Obviously, it goes hand in hand with reputation and all of that. So very insightful, and I do hope that we can take these conversations forward because they're very necessary. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Babazile. Yeah, Renee, I wish I could lip read. In my next life, I'm coming back to lip read. Then it's much easier. So you wanted to make a comment, Renee?
Yes, please, Oresti. And I know you have had the backup of your wonderful team to prompt you when I'm done and all of that. It's interesting how we, tag on these things. But I want to acknowledge what you said, Babazile, as well. Yes, we have the responsibility, and I'm taking that responsibility first and foremost as a communicator and a strategic communicator, that we are often our own worst enemies, because we want to compete with everybody else instead of having the confidence, which you said, Johna, is one of the things that comes from understanding how to use our measurement and our evaluation in an agile context. And my great friend from Cape Town, Deirdre, is here as well. And we did some excellent research earlier on in the year on capability framework, which I believe we need to plug in. The proud heritage that we have and that we can build on doesn't mean anything if we do not critically engage with some of the stuff that we are given now as a context, a different type of context. And, finding out the networks between us as to how we can enhance the success stories, plug into even more, data, if we want to talk data, because that is real data. It's real data if I can change and convince somebody that the NPA is actually working towards a greater trusting South Africa. That is a success story. It's far more a success story than the millions of dollars or rands that we are trying to get in as investments. So we need to also change our perception that we do not only subscribe to the one type of measurement tool.
No, I think, Renee, that's such a great example. And when you're looking at it, it really is the critical piece, because that's where those influences of all of that other data come in, right? And so what you'll see is when you're looking at reputation, when you're looking at trust, you're also going to see, in a financial institution, more people investing with you. You're going to see larger portfolios coming to you when you have the reputation, the credibility, and the trust of that. And so those are all things that can be driven by that confidence in communication that are very significant markers that you can work with, the sales team on. So it isn't a direct attribution model, but looking at what their close cycle is. If your sales team is looking at a close cycle that goes from, 2 months to 45 days, that's real money. That's the money that every CFO cares about, because that is that conversion that hits right to the bottom line as far as profit.
So, yeah, again, Renee, I wish I could lip read. It would have been really cool. if you guys don't mind, can we stay? I mean, I haven't even got close to the number of questions that people have asked. Do you mind if we just stay another 5-10 minutes answering questions? Are you guys all okay? Fantastic.
No problem.
You have to leave. We are recording this session, so I know we did book it for an hour, but this hour has gone absolutely so quickly. It's unbelievable. Obviously, shows how insightful it is. Those who do, do have to leave. We will have a recording, and you can access it. Just talk to one of our team members at Ornico, and we'll send it to you. John, I've got a question here from Victor Sebeku. Thank you for an insightful presentation, John. Measurement techniques themselves may have limitations that simply must be acknowledged. In the wake of the fast-moving technological evolution, how do we maintain the basic humanity, dealing with stakeholders or aspects that require person-to-person related matters in measuring and evaluating our work as organizations? Very cool question.
It is a very cool question. Thank you, Victor. I would contend that just like anything else, we cannot be seduced by technology to make us stray from what we know to be right. Oftentimes the most common question that I get in any of these conversations, what tools do I need to use? What are you trying to build? How fast are you going to make it? Where is it going to be? Like the tool is so irrelevant down the road, and technology as well. What technology is doing in a meaningful way is through machine learning. It's taking that quantitative and delivering it to you faster. It's not, and it's allowing some of that other heavy lift for the qualitative through thematic search, through clustering, through some of those elements. It's allowing that data to come to you faster in some cases. But it isn't changing how those behaviors change, and then what those other pieces of that puzzle, how those fall into place once that data is there. And so it's like many other things. Just because you have access to the data doesn't mean it's meaningful to what you're trying to accomplish or to the goal that you have. And so oftentimes people get distracted by the technology and stop focusing on what they can affect and what they can change, and understanding the difference between the two. And groups that I see that are so heavily reliant on technology, those are some of the first ones to lose that humanity piece, right? They get so wrapped around the data that they forget that they're communicating with humans, and they lose some of those nuances in the language of, in working with their customer service team. So they're pulling, that data in from their CRM. That's where technology can be amazing, because once you start seeing the clustering of language that's being used by your customer, that can make everyone across the peso cycle that much smarter, using the language of the customer as opposed to, trying to organically create something that they would then have them adopt. So I would say you have to have an open mind about what technology is doing for your organization, and also having a very healthy amount of skepticism of the capability of technology and how that can both positively and negatively impact your data and the integrity of your data, that methodology that's going to be replicable.
But yeah, Bulewa, I think just one, in terms of the one question here, and I suppose both Babazile and Bulewa, Johna spoke about this devil's advocate, that when you're setting your objectives, needs to be within your group, okay? Which I think is a good idea in any brainstorming session at the end of the day, no matter whether it's setting objectives, setting a strategy, or whatever the realities. A lot of the times, people within your team, and because you're senior members of that team, don't want to disagree with you. So, Bulewa, how do you, if you do, how do you deal with this devil's advocate, and how do you encourage them to actually give you insights that maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable for you?
Especially in government, there's a big rank thing in government that you cannot disagree with your seniors. So I find that a lot, and therefore, luckily I actually now work a lot with agencies. Like, so we've got a social media agency that we're working on, because as I've explained, we're sort of really trying to get more and more into that space. And so all the thoughts and the insights that I thought I have, that, great ideas and all things that I want to implement, I now get these new young folk who know very much about what's happening in the social media space, and they tell me, no, that's not going to work, and and pretty much like Johna said, sometimes you because you come from this background of you have all the knowledge, you think of how communication should be and what are the important aspects to it, and now I've had to actually get into the space of really understanding that I don't know everything, and that is also the reason why I bring in outside people, which I think is much easier for them, because when they don't report to me, I don't pay their bonuses. They really have to focus on providing expertise, because it's also their reputations in line. So it's easier for them to do that. But you're right, in government, people just sit and go, okay. So really, it's great to actually know that you need to have that. And I don't know how we can instill it more, because just generally, there's a culture in government, and I don't know how many people are here that understand, is that it's very difficult to really get a constructive discussion when, there's that rank mentality going on. But we do also have a few brave ones that contribute to a great debate that takes us forward.
No, absolutely. We've been in some of those, and it's really, really cool. But I know. And yes, you're right. Utilizing the agency is a really cool idea, even from our perspective in terms of a monitoring company, to be able to give you those honest opinions. But Basile, I think the final note with the last one with you, how do you guys deal with a devil's advocate in your organization? It's a little bit easier, there's no doubt, than a government organization. But how do you deal with that?
Yeah, look, I think we very lucky, because we do have a culture of collaboration, and particularly in my team, I do like to work with people that don't look like me, don't think like me, for precisely that reason. And to Bulela's point, this is one of the reasons we partner creative agencies, because we do want the difference in opinion, because as I said earlier, the subject matter at hand is not sexy, it's not FMCG, so we do need a little bit of an edge that comes from a collective view. In my view, in my team in particular, I also have team members that are younger, some team members that are a lot more experienced, and I absolutely love that. And the only thing I always tend to ask for as a collective is, as long as we're meeting the objective, as long as we are on brand, we can go a bit on edge. Let's stay on brand. Let's meet the objectives, but let's co-create and happily go mad. And I welcome that totally, and it's worked. So I think I am in a bit more a peculiar position than Bulelo, unfortunately. So yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, that's so cool. Okay, guys, I think we're going to have to end it. Bulewa, just your final comments. Renee, Basile, let's start off with you, Bulewa. Your final comments.
Yes, no, thank you very much, Johna, for especially considering the time of night it is in where you are. We thank you very much for these really great insights. And obviously, I think we will get the presentation right, Oresti, because this is the one part in all the things, all the good things that we do, it's the part that we struggle the most in terms of how we then, how do we report the value that we think we bring in terms of what communication does in this space. And, so we sort of hop in and out in terms of what can we use, what is useful. So I'm really looking forward to engaging more with the subject with my team and with the executive of the organization. Thank you very much. The time is too short. I wish we had more time.
Yeah. Renee, your final comments?
Thank you, Oresti. I would like to really put out two things. One is a challenge and the other one is an invite. The challenge is for us to really become promoters for lack of a better word, of our own wonderful work by telling good stories. The second one is for an invitation for people to join me and our team and Ornico to actually start writing up wonderful case studies. So let us put ourselves out as critical thinkers in terms of what it is that we are doing. So we have some wonderful initiatives in PRISA and at the various higher education institutions in the country, and we can actually have a brilliant impact and wonderful outcomes, to use AMEC language, to our communication efforts. Thank you very much, Johna. It was wonderful seeing you again.
Pleasure.
Basile?
Yeah, totally agree with Renee and Bulelwa and everyone. And thank you for inviting me. I think first and foremost, absolutely right. We have to be a lot more deliberate in how we show up and share our work, because damn, we put in the work, you know. And I think for me, it's more a challenge to our partners, Ornico and so on, to challenge us even further, you know, because I think most times we are so used to the status quo of looking at AVEs, PR value, and so on and so forth. You know, do challenge us as brands, you know, help us take it to that next step. We're open to it now that we know what we know, you know, we are open to it, and it's going to be a lot more easier to go and sell it, you know, at the C-suite, even though in our cases, we will still have our, you know, AVE situation there. But yeah, I'm just challenging more our partners and our PR agencies as well. You know, push the envelope. We're ready. Let's learn together, and it's going to help us as a collective, you know, just showcase the amazing work that that we do for the benefit of the organizations that we represent. And thank you once again.
Thanks, Babazile, and thank you for attending it. Johna, your last word?
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm still disappointed we couldn't be in person, but sometime soon, I hope, for more discussions and more debate, really, because that's what makes us all smarter and stronger. I would encourage all of you to fail. You know, understand why you fail. Look at the data behind that. I think that it's one of the things where, as communicators generally, we're always looking to tell the good story, always provide the charts that go up, always be demonstrating those things that are so positive. No executive has had 100% success. They can understand failure, especially when you then can come back strategically and say, we know why we failed. Here's how we're going to change what we're doing so that we don't do that again. And then document those learnings and how you're going to offset that. It's a very empowering conversation to have with your team. Uncomfortable as anything in the moment, but empowering and really something that will help communicators lead the way in the organization, even more so than just telling the positive stories. Such a pleasure being here with all of you. We're all on this journey. There's so much to learn. I would encourage all of you to be kind to each other. You know, we're all under this like crazy amount of stress, and being kind to each other means being kind to yourself too. Don't forget that in the equation. And really, thank you again for the opportunity. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all.
So my final words, Johna, thank you very much for offering to stay awake till midnight. Actually, it's longer than midnight now. It's 1:15 in the morning. And I know you're not going to be sleeping much because you got your next presentation coming up soon. But I think, thank you very much for attending it. And yes, I did promise you a bush trip and a Cape Town trip when you do come. So it still holds. And just before I say thank you to Babazile, Bulelwa, and Renee, I think what Francois has done ultimately and set a set of different levels that actually clients can work with. I think he's done a fantastic job, and he set a level that's this. Let's just start at this basic, the basic level, and he goes from the basic level to say, okay, have you identified? You can measure stuff like something simple, like have you identified the top tier media list or the top 10 sources that you actually want to be in? I mean, that's a simple measurement. Because a lot of the times you're just putting in media into just anywhere, just sometimes to get those AVEs, but let's identify the top media. The second one is there a particular core message or topic that you want to be placing in that particular media. And here's something that we worked with an NGO about as well, because there was a lot of stuff that was happening in the media that was really not aligned to what they wanted to say. And over a year, you could see the conversations by the journalists ultimately changing and aligning them to that particular topic and messages. And I think that is really cool, and a simple measurement to actually work on. And number 3 on the basic level is sometimes just look at solicited and unsolicited coverage. And sometimes that can also be telling when you start delving into that information. So when we talk about, and that's just and there's a lot more basic level that we can have, but I mean, a lot of clients actually ask me, but it's sometimes complex. It's actually not that complex. Francois has given us 3 very, very simple ways to actually measure. And again, it depends on your objectives and it depends on all that. So it can be quite easy. So just finally, thanks for your time, Papazile, Bulewa, Professor Renee. It was really, really cool to have you guys here. Thanks for your insights. I really, really appreciate it. And we're always there to be the devil's advocate. Don't worry, we're up for it. You know what we like. So thank you very much, guys. And I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank